The next presenter is Jason Jerald. Jason got his PhD in computer science from UNC and has worked on a number of projects over the years related to virtual reality and health, including an NIH-funded grant focused on motion-controlled gaming for neuroscience education. And he's adjunct faculty at Duke University, investigating VR sickness mitigation, and he's the co-founder and principal consultant for NextGen Interactions. Jason has been running a demo of VR applications upstairs on the 5th floor, and will continue to do so at 2 o'clock if you guys are interested in checking out and hadn't had a chance to do it before. But with that, Jason.
Thank you, Brian. Okay. Welcome. Thanks for having me here. It's certainly great to be back at UNC. As Brian mentioned, I had done my PhD here up in the computer science building, so it's always great to be back. Okay, so Brian already did the introduction, so let's get into it. Basically, I fell in love with virtual reality back in the 90s and have really focused on this exclusively since then. It's just been fascinating to me. So here's some examples of different projects, but a lot of this work has really certainly not just been me, right? It's been working with some amazing organizations that I've had the opportunity to work with and learn from. Okay, so what the heck is this thing called virtual reality? Well, you really have to experience it to get it. And so upstairs we have something. Definitely come check it out later today, and we can show you. But it kind of can be a lot of different things. There's different ways to do virtual reality, different types of technologies, and a whole lot of diverse set of applications. But really what again, focusing on the experience, that you have to experience it. So this is just from my book. You're experiencing something as if it was real. Not necessarily real as in the world as we think about it, but what if you shrink yourself to be really small? That's not like it's real, but it's sort of real because it's like you're inside a giant model, right? So in some ways, even though it may not look like some place on Earth, it might be that, you know, you can look around, you can kind of walk around, you can grab things and such. That's what makes virtual reality really compelling. And of course, again, you have to experience it, but here I'll give my best shot at using the HTC Vive system that we're showing upstairs as some sort of some entertainment sort of applications. So the point is, you're in this world, you're surrounded by media, you know, visual, audio, you can sense of touch, instead of only looking at a 2D screen. Right? From a creative sort of perspective, this is brand new. I won't show that whole video since we don't have time, but you can certainly find examples of that online and such. And then the question of what is augmented reality, what is mixed reality, what is virtual reality, how are they different? Well, I've kind of given up on defining those because they become more and more blurred. And something we call XR, right, where X is the word of your choice, right? Augmented mixed reality. It seems like, you know, every month a new company comes out that tries to redefine the term mixed reality, right? So I sort of gave up, accepted XR, and what does that mean? Well, we have all the way on the left this interesting thing called real reality, right, which is sort of an inspiration for building these other things. On the right, we have fully immersive reality, like in that video, where you feel like you're inside these alternate worlds. And then in between that, we have things like augmented reality. This is an image from what the company Magic Leap is claiming to do. This is all real. You have these see-through glasses. You see that real world just like you're in that room. But then you can augment that world by putting computer-generated images on top of that. So this is obviously not a real wheel in that gym. And then 360 video, which is becoming the big thing. Right? That's capturing the real world, then recreating it so that you feel like you're in that space, even though maybe that was a different time and location than actually being in that lab. So those just using cameras to capture that real world versus computer-generated imagery. And of course, there's lots of other ways to do virtual reality. In fact, even though virtual reality is sort of new as far as you know, the popular media discovering it, it's certainly not new. Depending how you define virtual reality, right, you could go all the way back to prehistoric times of, you know, caveman drawing on walls, right, of trying to represent what their experiences and recreating it for others to experience, you know, being on the hunt. In the 1800s, there was a lot of interesting work, actually, not necessarily digital virtual realities, but these stereoscopes that you can look into these devices and sort of have this sense of depth. This, for example, is a stereoscope from the 1860s. It kind of looks like Google Cardboard that maybe some of you guys have tried, right? 1860s, it was all the rage. In fact, it was a bigger deal than, you know, 3D TV was a few years ago. There were literally millions of people, world fairs lining up to see these things for, a nickel, right? Or, the celebrities of the time, the Queen of England, for example, she was always big on this. Some of these other things, go all the way back to some of the first head-mounted displays in the 60s, this crazy thing called the Sensorama. A little bit bigger than today's head-mounted displays, but they were doing crazy things, right? They were doing that wide field of view, completely immersing the users. They would have, motion platforms, things that we're still struggling with today. And the funny one here is color, right? Color was a big deal back then. We kind of take it for granted now. So, lots of different, this patent from the 60s looks just like Google Cardboard. It's crazy to think about. So there's certainly been a lot of history, including here at UNC, the computer science department. They've been doing this. Actually, this is from the computer science department. He's manipulating molecules on the screen as if they're actually in front of him, and he has force feedback, right? That sense of touch. Funny story about this, actually, when I first launched my book, I was at a UNC alumni event at a conference, and someone came up real excited to me and asked me to sign the book. And I asked him what he was working on. Ends up, this was him, right? And it's a picture in my book, and I was like, oh, you should be signing my book. Right? So that was really cool, first signing. Okay, so there's a whole lot to do beyond just entertainment. And here's some examples. Some of these we worked on, some others have certainly worked on. Obviously, we don't have time to go through all of these today, but so I thought I'd choose two that we had a whole lot of fun working on related to health. And so I'm going to show you a medical visualization example and a neuroscience education example that Brandon mentioned. Okay, so this was actually done a few years ago, actually a little bit further back than a few years ago now, but with my former employer, Digital Art Forms, right? So similar to the systems you have today, being able to see those DICOM data sets, to be able to slice through a body and see, different parts, looking for tumors or whatever it might be. And so, of course, we can do what you kind of would expect to do within a virtual reality type of thing, is to be able to draw in 3D, right? Circle areas of interest and such. But then you can start drawing in 3D. You can, rotate those image planes around and maybe circle it along a different axis, right? So you start getting these sort of shapes that give you a better idea. And then you can grab those isosurfaces. You can, something. This is a CT scan here. You can grab something with a certain density, of course, and extrude out from that and be able to visualize these surfaces and such. And then you can start doing more interesting things. You can have, your transfer functions, being able to look at the different densities in different ways, different mappings of colors and such. But then you can actually travel inside, right? So we were working with virtual colonoscopy with Dr. David Kim out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, right? So we go inside, be able to crawl through the colon as if you were, taking on the role of a robot crawling through the body. But then we can also see these sort of, more standard-looking views, what maybe radiologists are looking for, but be able to see it in context of the surrounding data of these isosurfaces. Or what we really found, radiologists are really, I'm sure there's some here in the room, you guys are really good at what you're doing and you have tools that you're really effective at. We found out trying to it's not the right thing to try to replace tools that people are already good with, but how can we, what is the use case for that? It's really hard to compete with radiologists since they're so good at it. We kind of came to the realization it wasn't necessarily for radiologists or specialists, whatever the application, because they kind of already see it in their own mind. They get it. But being able to communicate that to others, and whether it's patient education or talking to a non-specialist, that's really where the power of VR can come into play. And so, here's another example, having sort of this multi-user environment. So we have these horrible-looking 1990s graphics that you're this avatar that these are the hands, right? These are these controllers that you're holding in your hands, and you're able to manipulate and navigate and interact with the world by these 3D cursors that are basically a representation, an abstract representation of your hands. But essentially what that allows you to do is kind of move around and crawl through the world, interact and such. And in this case, we have something we call a filter box or slice box. He's selecting what part does he want to cut out of the body so he can kind of get a better view from within without removing some of the noise. And then he can actually follow him through and sort of, he can, use these funny looking hands here in order to point things out and, discuss whatever they're looking Okay, so again, you have to experience this, but a video is the next best thing we can do. And so here's an example of how that would actually work.
My message is presented by Jason Jerald from Digital Outforms.
This is an interactive medical visualization package based upon digital art forms' two-handed interface. And the goal of digital art forms is to immerse users into virtual worlds, whether that's for a game or a military simulation or a medical visualization like we have here. What we can also do with this box is we can set the inside of the box to be more opaque like so, and everything outside the box to be completely transparent. That way we're able to move things that might get in our way so we can see only the areas we're interested in.
Okay, so essentially we're interacting in this sort of abstract way. It's really hard to get here, but once you start using the system and get accustomed to that, it can become very natural. One of the challenges was, of course, teaching that. So we had a whole lot of fun of how do you convey these concepts and be able to instruct users to do that. And teaching within VR can be very powerful, but it's not obvious how to do those things. So that's a hot research area, an exciting area. In this case, we use something that we call 3D multi-touch. You guys are all familiar with 2D multi-touch on your phone. You know, you go to Google Maps, you put your fingers on the screen, and you pull them apart in order to zoom in, right? This is similar here, where we can grab the data set, and we can, instead of using our fingers, we use our full hands, because that's what we're tracking, put our hands around the area of interest, which is in our case the point between the hands, then stretch our hands apart in order to scale up that data set, right? So we can zoom in very easily into spaces. What we can also do simultaneously with this 3D multi-touch is to be able to grab that data set and rotate it, right? And you can think about it either as rotating yourself or rotating the data. And we can also, of course, just grab it and move it. What's cool is you can do those simultaneously. You can reach out, do a zoom, rotation, and translation at the same time. And we found this was 5 to 9 times as fast as with a traditional mouse interface for this specific application. That's not always the case. Sometimes mouse and keyboard's better, but for fundamental 3D tasks, that can be pretty effective. And so, yeah, don't have the detail to go on all this here, but that's the basic idea. Okay, neuroscience education that Brian mentioned. Okay, so what does our workforce need in the future, whether it's related to health or not? And so, excuse me, I'm a little lost here. So according to the U.S. General Services Administration, we need our people to operate across a diverse set of tasks, right, rather than be specialized assembly line workers. Although that can be a great thing to use virtual reality for as well. And work is becoming, of course, more complex, and continuous learning is absolutely essential, right? What you learned 10 years ago might not apply anymore today. Heck, what you learned last week might not apply anymore today, the way things are moving. And how do we deal with information overload, right? So those are kind of things at a higher level beyond just the technology of what that might mean. And so as far as education goes, I love this quote from Benjamin Franklin, right? Tell me, that's how we do a lot of our teaching, but teach me, that's what as educators you guys have gotten really good at, but actually involving people, having them be engaged and interacting with whatever the subject matter is, that's where it gets really interesting and where I think, true learning, where it's truly embodied and becomes intuitive is important. And this is Dale's cone of learning. The idea is that there's all these different things, all the way from sort of abstract text, verbal, symbols and audio and such. Those are important, but also the basis, right? Sort of these direct, purposeful experiences with an emphasis on experiences instead of just learning it, in theory. And everything in between, right? Virtual reality fits perfectly with all of these things. And it's not like, one thing's more important than the other, but by bringing them together, we can really enhance what it's like to do with education. And so this was some more work, again, with my former employer, Digital Art Forms, where we created some educational games, right? With the big idea of what if we could have kids become more self-aware by becoming aware of their own bodies and how their brains work, right? Maybe they could step back and, as they're automatically, reacting to something, maybe if they got it so they really got that at an intuitive, sort of an embodied level, these concepts of how their brains work, they could start recognizing maybe as they react to something, oh, maybe that's not the best, that's not the most effective action for me to take. What if, that's just my, I'm getting frustrated or angry or something. Maybe if that's just my amygdala or whatever responding. they can step back and recognize that, then maybe they can start, thinking, well, maybe, that's not the most effective, appropriate action and can choose something else. So in this case, I'll show videos of these, but we have a few games here, right? Teaching all the way from, what are the different brain lobes to, more of a game-like experience, but then how does that relate to neuroscience? And then this, teaching about how neurons fire across the synaptic gap, right? But also teaching more abstract skills, right? How to read graphs, right? That's pretty important, whether it's how or anything else. So in this case, this was 5th graders, so very different than college sort of level work. Okay, so what I thought I'd do is show a video here of that first one.
The left side.
And so just like, you'd have a physical brain puzzle, right? But here we can add audio, video elements out of that, and also have the system react a little bit smarter for the user. So when he reaches out and touches something, some audio can play, telling you what that might do. Now you could do that with real toys, right? But in VR, we can start building these things a little bit more effectively and efficiently.
In this 3rd level, working title, Zombie Apocalypse Fred, the user protects Fred from the zombies.
Gotta have zombies.
You move Fred through the world with this navigation right. The motion mechanic is simple. Hold the world with either hand and stretch it or shrink it using both hands.
So it's sort of a version of that 3D multi-touch in this case.
Switch between God's eye and first-person view of the world. You create zombies with another ray. If these zombies don't want just any brain part, the student has to recognize the zombie's deficit and apply the correct ammo, the right brain part to it. In this version, we're indicating deficits with icons that float over the zombies' heads.
Okay, so you get the basic idea there. What's really funny about this design, we took that first game and we said, we want to teach the kids about what it is to be a software developer and all that, but what it is to do engineering. But also, of course, we wanted feedback from them. So we asked them what are the bugs. They were happy to point those out. But we also asked them, if you were going to design a game, what would you do? And this wasn't, in some ways, this wasn't even envisioned by us. This was designed and sort of thought up by 5th graders. Right? Because that got them so excited about it. When we asked them, what would you do? And they looked at us like we were idiots and said, what's wrong with you guys? You got to have zombies in here. So the idea was that, these aren't, not trying to destroy the zombies, but you're trying to help them. They just have, a brain deficit and you need to help them out, right? You need to sort of evaluate what the problem is.
That could work in corporate America.
What's that?
That could work in corporate America.
Yes, so when I said for kids to step back and be self-aware, yeah, I'm a kid, so that includes, I'm a kid at heart, so that includes me, becoming more aware of myself, and I think, a lot of adults. And so, in this next video, in summary,
Zombie Apocalypse Fred makes Fred's life depend on instant recall of the association of brain parts and behavior. Once this level is complete, that association is second nature.
so they literally embodied this learning. In fact, after we ran this pilot, the teacher got up and asked them to act out the different brain deficits, and they would actually step up and pretend they were the zombies. Oh, my right motor cortex, right? And they'd stumble around. And so they literally had learned it. We tried comparing that to more traditional teaching, and the problem was they just weren't getting the traditional teaching. I don't know if they weren't motivated. The teacher was good, so I don't think it was that. But that's one of the challenges. How do you compare, with traditional learning with something that's so different? Really hard to evaluate from a research perspective. But yeah, it was just too abstract for them to get in a traditional setting. So, a great example of the power. So what does that mean, right? What is the long term? What if as our kids are growing up with this technology, right, what is that going to change? And so how will it affect not just education in the long term, but society in general, right? And so you can think of them as VR natives, right? They grew up with this versus us. We have to, we're just migrating to this space, right? We're sort of have to learn how to use these things. But our kids, just like they can use iPads, right? They'll just are going to grow up with these sort of technologies. So I suspect our kids are going to, maybe be thinking differently, right? Maybe they, are attempt to do in multitasking more, right? Which maybe isn't the best thing to do because it's been shown multitasking isn't necessarily effective. But that's sort of their expectations, right? We have to sort of, none of these aren't all good, right? These are concerns as well, right? Of what are their expectations, right? Do they get bored from traditional education and you just can't teach that way anymore? It's going to be, they're expecting this crazy virtual reality game, right? How do we compete with that? So I don't know the answers to all these things, but definitely things to consider as we move forward, not just for our kids, but as a society in general. And to sum up this quote from Alvin Toffler, right, it's not just the literate now is not about knowing how to read and write, but the literate are going to be those that aren't able to learn, right? Continuous learning, but also unlearn things that maybe aren't applicable anymore, right? Another example, we've been working with Jack Horner, famous dinosaur paleontologist. Amazing guy. He's was the vision behind Jurassic Park, right? It's and dinosaurs named after him and such. But when I say anything about dinosaurs, I make a fool of myself, right? Because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever, when I was younger, I learned about dinosaurs no longer applies, right? I have to unlearn all of that stuff and then relearn what's more appropriate now because we know more. Okay, so that's it. If you're interested in sort of more about virtual reality, check out my book. I suspect this might be available if you guys are subscribed to the ACM digital libraries, then this is probably accessible to you guys without having to buy it. But definitely come check it out. This is kind of looking at VR from a human-centered approach instead of the technical approach. Although we have to think about how does technology work with virtual reality. And of course, a lot of references to some of the great works, for example, that's been done, a lot of the research here at UNC and other locations. Okay, and I don't know if we have time for questions or not, but...
We got 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, any questions? There we go.
One of the things I'm interested in for so many of our devices and such, and it's come up as a theme I think for people to talk about, is what was possible in a research lab 20 years ago is now possible for anyone with $200. And I think I'm really interested, I don't even know if there's a word for that, but how things change with scale and cost. Can you speak to that for VR?
Yeah, so one of the questions is, why can VR succeed now versus the 90s or the 80s or whatever? And of course, there's things like the cost has come down, the technology's improved, but the ability to create, I think, is one of the big ones that a lot of people don't think about, right? Before it took, 6 months of engineering effort, you had to be a graduate student to get some pixels on the screen. Now you can use these tools and literally get something up, still a learning curve, but literally you can get something going in a day, right? It may not be the best VR experience, but you are able to create, you're able to iterate, you're able to fail immediately, right? Another talk I give on failure, right? It's sort of agile methods, right? One of the questions I have in that talk is, how do you fail fast? How do you fail fast, right? And what's the best way to fail as much as possible in order to learn? And the answer is, of course, become a VR developer. Because you will certainly make mistakes, right? What you think might work, then you actually try it out, it doesn't work at all. Or vice versa, you say, no, I don't think that would work. No, you have to have that open mind because it might actually work. And so even those of us that have been doing it a long time, it's still not the case. We try things that we just think, yeah, that's a great idea, and then we try it and it's just not. So a whole lot of iteration, willingness to learn, that's possible now. It doesn't take you 6 months to go through a cycle. It can literally take you minutes to try something out. So VR, whether you're a creator or even just a user to VR, right? And it gives you that ability to fail safely, right? So Thomas Edison, Abraham Lincoln, these sort of stories you hear about them being failures, them being successful. That's partly because they failed, right? But now anyone can fail safely, right? Within virtual reality, because you can go, travel through space, you can, practice putting out fires, you don't have that risk of, actual death, right? You can try it again and again. And so, yeah, the potential there is just enormous.
Have you had much with VR and pain management?
No, so firsthand out of the San Francisco Bay Area, Howard Rose, you might be familiar with some of his stuff. They basically started off by using virtual reality for managing pain, right? So at a subjective scale, I don't know a lot about pain, but the standard questions, right? And removing bandages is one of my understanding, one of the most painful things. Fortunately, I can't say I've experienced that myself. But put them in VR, suddenly they're distracted, right? And it can be super effective as far as reducing those subjective levels of pain. And so definitely check them out firsthand if you haven't seen their stuff yet. Yes?
Do you have any concerns with like VR dehumanizing patients in any way?
Yes, so there are enormous challenges with virtual reality. I haven't thought so much about dehumanizing, but in the sense, well, maybe I have. So for example, if you have a first-person shooter, right, of, having a gun and shooting at people, the thing of the video game, people are concerned about that, if they're trained on a video game, the verdict's out on that. But when it comes to virtual reality, it becomes better and better, and now it really seems real, and they play those games, and then they come back and they think it's, it blurs those lines between what is real reality, what is virtual reality. Are kids going to understand what is real versus what's virtual? And is it okay to, play those games of, blowing people up, right? And I don't know the answer there, but that's certainly a concern that we need to be careful of and think about and consider as we move forward as technology becomes better and better. There's also lots of other challenges, such as very health related, is motion sickness or other problems with someone upstairs that mentioned his ability to focus was a problem. Today's head-mounted displays, we have a single focal plane, typically a couple feet out in front of us, right? But if you want to focus off something further in the distance, then that's not what the lenses are showing, what you're seeing with your eyes. So that can lead to, long-term use can, sometimes lead to headaches and things. And so there's a whole lot of challenges here. The technology certainly isn't perfected yet, and the great thing is that's an opportunity, right, for us to research that and, improve upon that technology and understand how us as humans can, use these technologies for good versus evil, because it could certainly be used either way. Anything else?
So how do you see, especially when you use VR for medical education, how do you see the process for integrating that into medical schools and actually impacting the way medical professionals are trained? Do you see any resistance, or do you see?
Yeah, so there's certainly some challenges. One is like the system, we have something upstairs. Have you tried that out yet? I think I saw you up there.
I've tried it before, yeah.
Okay, so there we sort of have, a virtual anatomy, right? But the challenge is it's sort of a single user system, right? So to get 150 people through that is a huge challenge. There's other forms of virtual reality, like at Duke University we have the Dive. Has anyone there tried the Cave or Dive? And so there multiple people can go in a room. So it's sort of this somewhere between virtual and augmented reality, because I'm seeing my real body, I'm seeing the other users and such, but it's very real, even though the images are basically projected on the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. And it's stereoscopic, so it looks like it has depth. The walls sort of meld away. You feel like you're in this space. The images come out, pop out from the walls, sort of like a 3D film. And you can get a group of people within that room, right? Oh, and by the way, the head's tracked, at least for a single user, so you can walk around objects, and it feels like, unlike a 3D film, you can walk around as if that object's in the room instead of just looking at it. It's super immersive. It's very similar to head-mounted displays, but very different implementation. But that's like an example of a group type setting. Fortunately, that costs a little bit more than Google Cardboard, right? So that's extremely expensive. But there's sort of other forms of virtual and augmented reality that might be more appropriate. These sort of technologies I showed here, the head-mounted displays, aren't necessarily a good fit for everything, right? You want to choose the right tool for what's most appropriate for your use case. But as far as, if everyone had access to this as it comes down, then they could have their own personal system. You can imagine, going home and learning, right? And making that more engaging and being more motivated to get those students in these systems. But yeah, access is a major challenge. The Google Cardboard is, the $15 version, so you can hand out. We give workshops with AT&T in different cities throughout the country, and what we do is we hand out Google Cardboard, right? Because not everyone has actually experienced this sort of thing. So even though it's not as immersive or as good as some of this stuff, at least it gives them a basic concept instead of us just trying to explain it in words or in a video. I guess I should have brought 50 of them here so I could. Okay, I believe we are about out of time. Definitely come upstairs to the 5th floor if you want to try out an example of a medical application we're sharing from a company called ShareCare for visualizing anatomy.
Great, thank you.